Most places on this planet look exactly like you'd expect. Mountains are grey. Rivers run clear. Deserts are sand. Then there are the others. A river, the color of blood, so acidic, almost nothing lives inside it. A lake that swallows an entire park underwater every summer. A wilderness where rocks have grown into shapes no textbook has ever named. A mountain where fire has burned from the rock itself since the time of Homer. Some of these places have colors that have no name in any language. Some look less like Earth and more like somewhere we haven't landed yet. So why does the world keep these places quiet? Trip, for you didn't find these places in a travel guide. We found them where the rules of nature stop making sense. This is the Earth that doesn't follow the rules. And after this, you'll never look at a map the same way again. Hengifoss is tucked into a quiet ravine in East Iceland, where a long footpath follows the river up through open heath and scattered birch. Known as Hengifoss, Iceland, it sits inland from the East Fjords, not far from Egilsstadir and the wide, calm waters of Lagarfljót. Below the main drop, Litlanesfoss appears first, framed by dark basalt columns that look almost architectural, as if they were placed there by design. Farther up, the canyon narrows, and the cliff face becomes a record of older eruptions, stacked and cooled in patient layers. At Hengifoss, the most striking detail is the backdrop itself. Thin red bands of clay threaded through black basalt, set directly behind the falling water like a natural striped wall. Rio Tinto is a river valley in Andalusia where water, stone, and history feel tightly bound together. In Rio Tinto, Spain, the landscape carries the marks of centuries of extraction and earth science in plain view. The basin around Minas de Rio Tinto has been worked since ancient times, and mining reshaped the ground into terraces, cuts, and spoil heaps, even after the loudest machinery has gone quiet. The terrain still reads like an open ledger of ore. What makes this place unusually vivid is chemistry on display. Iron-rich minerals and naturally acidic water create conditions where hardy microorganisms thrive, tinting the river with deep reds and burnt oranges. Most evenings, the defining sight remains the river itself, a narrow ribbon of rust-red water that leaves orange crust on stones at the edge. Even in stillness, that metallic sheen holds the eye. Fuerteventura feels like a quiet edge of Spain, where land holds back its colors and lets light do most of the talking. In Fuerteventura, Spain, the air is dry, and the horizon stays wide and uncomplicated. In the old inland capital of Betancuria, white walls and stone churches sit in a valley shaped by brief, hard rain. Even here, the island's spare vegetation and open skies keep the mood measured and calm. Farther south, the Jandia Peninsula stretches into low mountains, with long tracks leading toward Cofet's empty beach. The sand is broad and unguarded, and the sea sounds closer than anything else. On the west coast near Agrio, dark cliffs and sea caves cut into ancient basalt, and the shore turns almost black. Salt wind moves through rough lava textures and leaving small pools and sharp shadows at low tide. Near Lajares, round volcanic cones like Calderon Hondo hold a simple crater path, scattered with loose stones and pale dust. From the rim, the island looks more like a desert than a resort. But the most distinctive sight is in the Parque Natural de Corralejo, pale dunes that drift right up to hardened lava fields. In the steady wind, the sand quietly redraws the same landscape grain by grain. Pink Lake Torrevieja sits on Spain's Costa Blanca, where a broad salt lagoon meets low sunlit hills and quiet wetlands. Its calm surface can look almost unreal, even on an ordinary afternoon. Known locally as a saltwater lake, Pink Lake Torrevieja, Spain. Spain is part of a protected natural park shared with the neighboring lagoon of La Mata. Around the edges, pale salt crusts and sandy paths hint at centuries of work tied to sea, sun, and evaporation. The color is not paint or pollution, but biology responding to intense salinity. Tiny algae and salt-loving microbes flourish when conditions are right, tinting the water from soft rose to deep strawberry. Nearby, white salt pyramids and industrial basins show that Torrevieja's identity has long been linked to salt extraction. In summer heat, the air can carry a faint mineral tang that feels both coastal and inland. Birdlife uses these wetlands as a resting and feeding ground, and flamingos sometimes appear as pale shapes against the bright water. The surrounding scrubland stays low and tough, shaped by wind, sun, and brine. Visitors often come expecting a trick of light, but the lake's hue holds steady across wide, open stretches. The most distinctive detail is that persistent, natural pink sheet of water, spreading edge to edge like a quiet stain of color. Mount Chimaera sits on a pine-covered slope above the Mediterranean coast of Turkey, where stone and scrub meet a narrow mountain path. Locals know it as Yanatash, a place where the ground does something unexpected. In Antalya province, the walk begins near Chirala and threads uphill through limestone rubble, warm air, and the scent of resin. The trail is simple, but the destination feels oddly timeless. Mount Chimaera, Turkey, lies within ancient Lycia, not far from the ruins of Olympos, where blocks of masonry rest beside a river valley. Here, history and geology share the same quiet backdrop of cedar and bay laurel. The science is straightforward. Natural gas seeps through fractures in the rock, finding oxygen at the surface. For centuries, travelers described these lights without understanding the chemistry beneath their feet. Visit at dusk, and you'll notice how the hillside changes character as shadows lengthen. Families bring tea, hikers pause to warm their hands, and the sound of steps fades into night insects. The stones around the vents are darkened and glazed, like a small hearth scattered across the slope. It's an open-air phenomenon, modest in size, yet impossible to confuse with anything else. What stays with you is the fire itself, steady, fingertip-high flames licking straight from bare rock, burning without wood and holding their place in the wind. Sumela Monastery sits tucked into the Pontic Mountains above the Altundari Valley, where dense forest muffles the sound of water below. Locals know it as a landmark of Trabzon's high country in Turkey. Approaching on foot, the route threads through spruce and beech, then opens onto a pale rock face that seems to hold the complex in place. The air here stays cool and damp, even when the coast feels warm. Inside, visitors pass through courtyards and narrow stairways shaped by centuries of weather and repair. Rooms for pilgrims, kitchens, and storage spaces hint at a self-contained life clinging to a steep slope. The heart of the site is its chapel, where painted scenes still cling to plaster despite smoke, moisture, and time. Light enters unevenly, and colors surface in fragments, faces, robes, and borders whenever the sun angles in. Not far away, Turkey's Black Sea region keeps other quiet monuments, small village mosques, stone bridges, and high pastures, yet few feel as physically suspended as this one. The landscape itself sets the pace, demanding slow steps and careful looking. What stays with you most is the monastery's placement beneath a massive rock overhang, an architectural shelter that is also the mountain's own ceiling. Madonna della Corona sits quietly on a sheer mountainside above the Adige Valley, where the cliffs of Monte Baldo narrow the view and the air feels a little cooler even in summer. Known fully as Madonna della Corona, Italy, the sanctuary belongs to Veneto, not far from Verona, yet it seems separated from ordinary routes by stone and distance. Pilgrims have come here for centuries, but many travelers still pass below without noticing it. The approach often begins near the hamlet of Spiazzi, then continues on foot along switchbacks and steps that follow old mule paths. With each turn, the sounds of traffic fade, replaced by wind and the occasional bell. Inside, the space is modest and carefully tended, with quiet chapels, votive offerings, and devotional art that reflects local craft traditions. Light shifts across the floor as clouds move over the ridge, changing the mood minute by minute. From the terraces, you look out over vineyards, villages, and the long corridor of the valley, framed by pale rock and sparse mountain greenery. Even the stonework feels deliberate here, fitted to a landscape that does not forgive mistakes. What stays with you is the building's single, unmistakable feature. Its walls and terrace are set directly into the vertical limestone, tucked beneath a natural overhang as if the cliff itself were part of the church. Garni Gorge sits not far from Yerevan, where the Azat River has carved a narrow corridor through dark volcanic rock. In Garni Gorge, Armenia, the air often carries the cool scent of water and wet stone. The walls show a long geological memory, layers of basalt laid down by ancient lava, then slowly cut open by current and frost. In places, the river bends sharply, and the sound of it tightens into a steady hush. Above the gorge, the classical lines of the Temple of Garni give the landscape an unexpected order, a human counterpoint to the canyon below. Nearby, the rock-cut spaces of Gegard feel like an extension of the same stone, shaped by hands rather than weather. Spring runoff turns the channel quick and bright, while summer brings dappled shade along the banks. And even in calm weather, the gorge keeps a small, private climate, cooler than the open plateau. Giola Lagoon sits on the rugged southern coast of Thasos, where pale stone meets the steady blue of the Aegean Sea. The walk-in is part dirt track, part footpath, edged by low shrubs and sun-warmed rock. Known locally as a natural pool, Giola Lagoon, Greece, is not a constructed bath at all, but a hollow carved by water and time. From above, it looks like geometry drawn into the shoreline, an unlikely basin set just back from open waves. The surrounding landscape stays stubbornly Greek: pine-scented hills, dry grasses, and scattered olive trees inland. Down at the coast, the air carries salt and the faint mineral smell of sunlit stone. Lipa Cave rests in the karst hills above the old royal town of Cetinje, where limestone has been slowly opened by the water over long spans of time. The entrance feels modest, but the underground scale quickly changes. Known locally for generations and explored in earnest in the modern era, Lipa Cave, Montenegro is now one of the country's best documented cave systems. Inside, temperature and humidity stay steady, and sound softens into a low, careful hush. Visitors pass through wide chambers and narrower corridors shaped by seepage and ancient flow, with pale walls polished by mineral films. Stalactites hang in clusters, while thick stalagmites rise where drops have kept the same patient rhythm. White cliffs of Dover sit along the Kent coast, their pale edge defining the view where land meets the English Channel. Up close at White Cliffs of Dover, United Kingdom, the scale feels less like a postcard and more like a working landscape of wind and stone. Footpaths cut through short grass and wildflowers, and the air carries the steady salt of the sea. On quiet days, only gull calls and distant waves fill the gaps between hikers. Near South Foreland Lighthouse, the terrain shifts gently, with low scrub and lookout points that invite long pauses. The lighthouse grounds feel deliberately simple, a practical outpost on a moving shoreline. Farther along, the cliffs above St. Margaret's Bay offer a different angle, with sheltered water below and steep paths threading down through chalky soil. From here, the coast reads like a layered diagram of time. Shakespeare Cliff, closer to Dover, shows the same geology in sharper cuts, where vegetation gives way to raw faces. The sound changes too, as waves hit the base and return as a low, hollow thrum. Even inland, toward Deal and Canterbury, the presence of the coast lingers in the light and the wind. It's a corner of England where weather and visibility shape daily decisions. What stays longest is the chalk itself, a wide, clean white wall marked by thin, dark seams of flint, brightest when the sun turns low and the sea below looks steel grey. Grüner See sits at the foot of the Hochschwab Mountains in Styria, a place where a quiet basin becomes something else each year. Many know it simply as Grüner See, Austria, Austria, though its feeling is unmistakably local. In winter, it's a modest lake bordered by forest and stone, with trails that feel close to the ground. The air is sharp, the light low, and the valley seems made for walking rather than watching. When spring snowmelt arrives from the surrounding peaks, the water expands into the meadow and through the trees. What was grass becomes shoreline, and the lake's color shifts toward an intense, glassy green. Divers come for the clarity, but the surface tells its own story, a calm mirror, interrupted by submerged branches, even from above, and you can read the depth by the way the bottom stays visible far from shore. Styria's villages nearby keep their usual rhythms, fields, small roads, and the steady presence of the Austrian Alps. By early summer, the water begins to retreat, leaving the valley to dry and reset. What lingers in memory is the seasonal, crystal-clear meltwater that quietly covers the park paths and benches, turning an everyday green space into an underwater scene. Zion National Park feels like a carved sanctuary of sandstone and water in southern Utah. In Zion National Park, United States, distance is measured less in miles than in canyon turns and changing light. At dawn, the cliffs along Zion Canyon take on a muted copper tone, and cottonwoods gather along the Virgin River like quiet witnesses. Even the air seems cooler where shade pools beneath overhangs. Many visitors never leave the main road, but the park's side corridors hold subtler wonders. In the slick rock country above, small basins collect rain, feeding hanging gardens that cling to seep lines. Farther west, Kolob Canyons offers long views and fewer voices, where finger-like valleys split the plateau into broad, empty spaces. In spring, a dark volcanic soils there can flash with wildflowers after a storm. For those who plan carefully, routes like the subway reveal sculpted bowls and water-worn curves shaped patiently by seasonal flow. The stone underfoot tells you when the river has been high, polished smooth and pale. Still, the park's most intimate path is not really a trail at all. In the Narrows, the Virgin River becomes the route, and the canyon walls close in until shade, sound, and water share the same narrow corridor. Death Valley National Park sits in eastern California, where distance and dryness shape every mile of ground. Even the air can feel spare, as if sound has less to hold on to. In Death Valley National Park, United States, the valley floor stretches wide and pale, bordered by folded ranges that block storms and keep the basin arid. The light changes quickly here, turning gravel and salt from white to pink to gray. At Mesquite Flat sand dunes, wind works patiently, combing ripples into clean lines that look freshly drawn each morning. Footprints linger longer than you expect, then soften at the edges. Farther north, Uber-heaped crater opens like a sudden cut in the desert, its cinder slopes tinted black and rust. Standing at the rim, or you can trace old eruptions in the layered ash. Titus Canyon narrows into polished walls, with dry washes and scattered stones that carry the marks of flash floods. In the quieter bends, you notice how small plants choose shade with care. On the high road to Dante's View, temperature and color shift with elevation, and the valley becomes a map of alluvial fans and salt. The scale is easier to grasp from above. Down at Badwater Basin, the park's most distinctive surface spreads out in hexagonal plates of salt, bright and brittle under the sun. It's a vast white crust at 282 feet below sea level, still and exacting. Capitol Reef National Park feels like a long, quiet corridor of stone in south-central Utah, where roads thin out and the land holds its distance. In Capitol Reef National Park, United States, the scenery doesn't announce itself all at once. It reveals itself mile by mile. The park's backbone is the Water Pocket Fold, a 100-mile wrinkle in the Earth's crust that tilts cliffs, domes, and slick rock into a single, continuous boundary. Rain collects in shallow pockets, leaving dark stains and small basins that tell you where water lingered after the last storm. Near Fruta, cottonwoods and apricot trees line the Fremont River, a surprising ribbon of shade in a country of sun and stone. Old irrigation ditches, split-rail fences, and weathered cabins hint at the brief moment when farming tried to take root here. Farther out, narrow canyons cut into the rock, and Capital Gorge funnels you between polished walls marked by old names and dates. Along the roadside, Fremont culture petroglyphs sit above the pavement, quiet and precise against varnished sandstone. In Cathedral Valley, monoliths stand apart across open desert, and bentonite clay turns the hillsides pale and smooth after rain. At night, the sky often arrives without moonlight, and the park grows even larger in the dark. What stays with you most is the water pocket fold itself, one unbroken, buckled line of rock that shapes every canyon, orchard, and overlook, as if the land has been gently creased and never fully flattened again. Arches National Park sits on Utah's high desert, where wind, winter freeze, and time have shaped sandstone into improbable openings. In Arches National Park, United States, the land feels both spacious and finely detailed. The rock began as layers of sand and ancient salt deposits laid down long before the Colorado River cut its course. As the buried salt shifted, it fractured the surface above, setting the stage for fins of stone. Walk among those fins, and you notice how carefully erosion works. A narrow seam, a shallow alcove, then a window that slowly thins. Balanced rock and the windows section make that progression easy to read, even from a pullout. On the trail to Delicate Arch, the slick rock rolls underfoot like weathered leather, and the air carries the dry scent of juniper. Late light warms the Entrada sandstone into soft reds and muted oranges. Not every wonder is large. Some are tucked close to the ground. In the shade of a shallow overhang, you might find tiny potholes holding rainwater, brief habitats in an otherwise spare landscape. After sunset, the park grows quiet in a different way, with a dark sky that makes distances feel longer. Even then, the stone keeps its shape, pale and still against the night. What defines this place more than anything else is the sheer concentration of natural sandstone arches, thin, freestanding spans of entrada rock opened by cracks, frost, and patient desert wind. Bryce Canyon National Park feels less like a single canyon and more like a high open rim, where you look down into stone shaped by time and frost. Here in Bryce Canyon National Park, United States, the air is thin and dry, and the light changes quickly across the Pansorgan Plateau. At sunrise and sunset points, the amphitheater opens into a dense city of rock spires, their edges sharpened by winter ice that pries at every crack. Down on the Navajo Loop, switchbacks slip between Wall Street's narrow corridors, where tall fins of limestone briefly keep the sun off your shoulders. Fairyland Loop wanders farther from the crowds, with quiet overlooks where every step reveals another cluster of hoodoos lined up like weathered sentries. In the park's north end, the road to Rainbow and Yovimpa Points stretches the view toward distant mesas, while ancient bristlecone pines cling to pale soil. After dark, the elevation brings a clean, cold sky, and the Milky Way can appear as a faint, granular band above the rim. What stays with you is the hoodoos themselves, thousands of orange and cream limestone spires, each one slightly different, standing close enough to feel like a crowded, silent forest. Factory Butte sits alone on the open desert, a landmark that feels more like a study in geology than a destination. In central Utah, it marks a quiet corner of the American West, where the roads thin out quickly. Known as Factory Butte, United States, it stands near the small town of Hanksville, between wide basins and distant mesas. The air is dry, the soundscape is spare, and the horizon seems to stretch a little farther than expected. Up close, the Butte's shape looks oddly deliberate, with steep flanks cut by erosion into angular shelves and gullies. Sparse grasses give way to bare ground, and the light changes the surface from soft gray to hard slate. All around it, the bentonite-rich badlands break into low ridges and shallow bowls, and turning to slick mud after rain and powder When the wind returns, tire tracks and footprints can linger because so few people pass through. Photographers and off-road travelers sometimes come for the emptiness, staying clear of protected areas nearby, like Capitol Reef country. Most days, though, the scene feels unoccupied, with only ravens circling the thermals. What stays with you is the Butte's dark, coal-stained cap, set sharply above the pale, chalky clay hills. A single black crown on a washed-out desert floor. Bisti/De-Na-Zin Wilderness sits in northwestern New Mexico, a quiet spread of badlands where the ground looks more like sculpted clay than desert sand. Known officially as Bisti/De-Na-Zin Wilderness, United States, it lies within the San Juan Basin, where ancient swamps and river deltas once gathered thick layers of mud. Time compressed them into shale and sandstone, then weather loosened the surface again. There are no marked trails, only open country, and a horizon that keeps shifting as you walk between low ridges. Footprints hold briefly in the dust, then wind softens them until the route feels newly made. Along the washes, scattered fragments of petrified wood and dark seams of coal hint at the vegetation that once grew here. Oh, the palette changes by the minute, from pale grey to charcoal, with streaks of rust and tan in between. Some slopes split into polygon cracks, like dried paint, while nearby hills erode into ribs and fins that look hand-carved. In places, rounded boulders collect in pockets, as if set aside by the rain. Light does most of the storytelling. Morning flattens the terrain, and late afternoon pulls out every wrinkle and shadow. Even a small cloud can turn a formation from warm to cold in seconds. Most distinctive are the fragile hoodoos, thin stone stems holding broader capstones that stand in clusters, precise and temporary, in the open New Mexico air. Salto del Agrio sits in the open air of northern Patagonia, where the Agrio River slides through dark volcanic rock before dropping in a clean, measured plunge. Here in Salto del Agrio, Argentina, the landscape belongs to Neuquén province. Wide skies, sharp horizons, and the Andean foothills set back like a quiet wall. The road from Caviahui feels remote without being harsh. Up close, the waterfall's sound is steady rather than thunderous, and wind carries a cool mist across the rim. Below, the river gathers itself into a pool that seems too bright for the surrounding stone. The cliffs show their origins plainly: basalt columns, fractured ledges, and streaks of mineral color laid down over time. Iron-rich seepage paints the rock in rust red and ochre bands, as if the canyon were brushed with pigments. Nearby, the volcanic presence of the Copahui area shapes the water and the ground, from hot springs to mineral soils, even when the air feels calm. It's a region where geology stays visible, not hidden. What lingers most is the contrast at the base of the falls. A ribbon of milky turquoise water set against a vertical wall stained orange by minerals, like a living mural of stone and flow. Valdés Peninsula sits off Argentina's Patagonian coast, a broad sweep of arid steppe meeting the Atlantic in quiet, wind-shaped curves. Its distance feels immediate in the spare colors and long horizons. Known formally as Valdés Peninsula, Argentina, the land narrows at the Istmo Carlos Ameghino, where salt lakes lie below sea level and thorny shrubs cling to shallow soils. Even the air carries a dry, mineral edge. Along the gravel roads, guanacos move in loose groups, and maras pause at burrow entrances, while choiks thread through low brush. Life here is not abundant, but it is finely tuned to drought and wind. On the northern coast near Punta Norte, the shoreline alternates between rocky shelves and small coves, and the surf patterns shift with the tide, and sea lions haul out in noisy clusters, then slip back into green water. Farther south at Caleta Valdés, pale cliffs and long beaches create a narrow, sheltered inlet, separated from the open ocean by a slim barrier of sand and stone. Shorebirds patrol the rack line with quick, precise steps. When conditions are right, the nearby waters also draw southern right whales close to land, their dark backs rolling slowly in the shallows. From the edge of the peninsula, the sea can seem unexpectedly close and intimate. What sets Valdés apart is the calm, enclosed water of Golfo Nuevo, a natural basin where the surface often lies smooth under the Patagonian wind, close enough to watch each slow exhale drift over the bay. Ojos de Mar sits quietly on Argentina's high-altitude Puna, where the land feels more mineral than soil. The air is thin, the light is sharp, and distance is measured in silence. Known as Ojos de Mar, Argentina, this remote spot lies near small desert settlements in Salto province. Reaching it usually means hours on gravel tracks that cross salt and volcanic stone. Here, rainfall is scarce, and the wind moves is fine dust in slow veils across the flats. In the dry season, even footprints can linger, pressed into crusts of salt and clay. The pools form where groundwater meets the surface, carrying dissolved minerals up from deep layers of rock. Along the edges, salt gathers in pale rims, and the shoreline looks etched rather than eroded. Shh. Scientists and local guides describe unusual microbial communities in these waters, shaped by extreme sun, cold nights, and high salinity. Even without instruments, you can sense the chemistry in the smell and the sting of dried crystals. Nearby, the Puna's wide horizons connect to other Argentine salt landscapes like Salinas Grande and the basins around Tola Grande, yet few places feel as intimate as two small circles set into so much open space. What stays with you is the color, round pools of dense turquoise water, sharply outlined against a white, chalky crust. Pumice field spreads across Argentina's high desert like a pale shoreline left far above sea level. Locals in Catamarca know it as a place where the ground itself looks sun-bleached and weightless. In Pumice Field, Argentina, the air is thin and dry, and the horizon sits under huge skies of the Andean Puna. Even in daylight, the silence feels amplified by distance and altitude. This landscape began with explosive volcanic eruptions that hurled frothy rock into the open, where it cooled into pumice, stone filled with trapped bubbles. Over time, wind and rare rain went to work, shaving and sorting it grain by grain. Driving out from Antofagasta de la Sierra, the route crosses salt flats, dark lava fields, and scattered shrubs that cling to the cold. And each shift in terrain makes the whiteness ahead seem even more improbable. Up close, the surface is not flat at all. It breaks into low walls, rounded mounds, and narrow corridors of chalky grit. Footsteps compress it with a soft crunch, while the sun throws sharp shadows into every pocket. At its calmest, the pumice field's most distinctive feature is the wind-carved forest of white pumice cones and ridges, a bright labyrinth that stays luminous even under the harshest Argentine light. Cuenca rests on a high plateau in central Spain, shaped by wind, stone, and long-distance views. In Cuenca, Spain, the old town feels suspended between two river gorges, the Yuca and the Hueca. At Plaza Mayor, the cathedral's unusual facade sits beside quiet civic buildings, giving the square an almost enclosed calm. Light shifts quickly here, sliding from sun to shade as clouds pass over the serrated skyline. A short walk leads to the San Pablo Bridge, where ironwork spans the Hueca like a careful stitch. Looking down, you sense how the town's daily routines were engineered around steep drops and limited ground. Beyond the walls, the landscape turns spare and sculptural, with paths leading to viewpoints and to the strange rock forms of the Ciudad Encantada. Even on a clear day, the terrain can feel quietly otherworldly. Museums and small workshops keep close to the old stone, including art displayed inside the famed hanging buildings. Life continues at a measured pace, punctuated by church bells and the soft rush of water far below. What lingers most is the casas colgadas, their wooden balconies projecting over the Hueca's sheer limestone, as if the town chose the edge on purpose. In the late light, those overhanging rooms seem to hover in stillness above the gorge. Teide National Park settles across a high volcanic plateau on Tenerife, where thin air and bright light sharpen every outline. Teide National Park, Spain, sits within the Canary Islands, a Spanish landscape shaped more by lava than by soil. Black basalt flows, pale pumice fields, and rust-colored cinders lie side by side, showing different moments of eruption and cooling. Near Roques de Garcia, erosion has carved stacked, leaning towers from tougher rock left behind as softer layers wore away. Life here is specialized and patient, clinging to cracks and sheltered hollows. In spring, Taginasti plants send up tall red flower spikes, while Canary Island pines on the margins endure sun, wind, and long dry spells. Most visitors cross the park on TF21 and TF38, stopping at viewpoints that look across a terrain that feels almost mineral. Trails thread through old lava tongues, and the cable car offers access to the upper slopes where footing turns gritty and fragile. After sunset, the park grows quieter, and the sky often clears with surprising steadiness at this elevation. The ground keeps its heat briefly, then cools fast, and the scent of dust and resin replaces daytime warmth. What stays with you most is Las Cañadas Caldera, a broad windswept basin ringed by steep volcanic walls, its floor alternating between ash-gray flats and dark, broken lava.